I got pregnant at 16, my parents disowned me and tried taking custody of my daughter. After 10 years, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer and both want to reconnect with me and get to know their grandchild. I need help on how to handle this. Don't miss out on the fun. Hit subscribe button and join our community for more stories like this one. When I was just 16, I shared an intimate moment with my close friend, Jared. Little did I know that this single incident, where the condom failed us, would lead to the creation of my precious daughter. In a shocking turn of events, my once loving parents, who had always been there for me, vehemently disapproved and demanded that I undergo an abortion. However, deep within my heart, I couldn't bear to part with the unborn life within me. I longed to embrace my baby. This decision shattered the bond between my parents and me. Of course, they told me to pack my stuff and leave the house and their lives. With a heavy heart, I left everything behind and sought refuge in the home of Jared's family. While they were not exactly thrilled with the situation, they understood that we needed to support each other as we were about to welcome a new family member into our midst. During that tumultuous time, a remarkable transformation occurred between Jared and me, a blossoming of emotions that we couldn't deny. I had my daughter, and about 2 months later Jared's brother came back into our lives. He was a recovering heroin addict. As we had the baby, my mother-in-law told him he could not stay with us. Gradually, however, they allowed him back into their home, and he started spending nights there. Unfortunately, he eventually succumbed to a relapse and resorted to stealing. My parents got wind of that. They dug up a bunch of stuff and found out that my mother-in-law also fought addiction after an accident she had 15 years ago left her addicted to pain meds. Driven by their disapproval and judgment, my parents decided to involve Child Protective Services, CPS, initiating a full-fledged investigation into our lives. It was an incredibly dark and terrifying period. I feared they would take away my precious child. Fortunately, in the end, they found no substantial evidence to support their claims. But this initial call to CPS became an unfortunate tradition over the years. In our small town, every mistake I made somehow found its way back to my parents. I would be half an hour late to pick up my child due to work, and CPS charges were filed on grounds of neglect. If I dared to be out with my toddler after 10 p.m., be it for a family gathering or any legitimate reason, CPS would be called once again. Even during Christmas, when numerous relatives stayed at Jared's house, creating a bustling atmosphere, CPS was summoned. Due to the presence of unfamiliar men, their relentless calls to CPS eventually subsided, as they were rightfully fined for their unnecessary and baseless accusations against me. If they had persisted in their actions, it might have constituted an offense in itself. The most recent call occurred 5 years ago. Eventually, Jared and I married when we were 23, and we are quite happy. We worked retail jobs and studied. It took us longer than average to graduate, but we did. With a lot of help of his parents. Jared is now an engineer, and I work as a graphic designer. With our combined efforts, we managed to secure a spacious apartment and finally leave his parents' home. Our lives now resemble something close to normalcy. Anyway, a week ago I get a call from my mother who told me my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that his ultimate wish is to see me and my daughter again. Frankly, I find myself at a crossroads. While I acknowledge that my parents were not obligated to care for me during my pregnancy, I yearned for their support, their understanding. The torment they inflicted upon me for 5 agonizing years, though rooted in their panicked belief that I would be an inadequate mother, still lingers within me. Comments. You are under no obligation to allow toxic people back into your life or the life of your daughter. What do you want? I would respond with, any conversation begins with a sincere apology for your despicable efforts to steal my daughter and damage my family over the last 5 years. Failing in that, you are both dead to me already. Don't do it. They aren't doing it because he's sick. If he's really sick, that is. They are doing it to make themselves feel better, or they are possibly doing it so that they can claim to have a relationship with your daughter and thus file for grandparents' rights. Yes. This is a thing in many places. If you do choose to do it the first time by yourself, and do not bring your daughter. See how they behave. If they try to justify, minimize, or rug sweep their behavior, leave immediately. There are states like New York, who are utterly ridiculous and will grant visitation if you've so much as breathed on the child. Up, be careful and read your state law carefully. They need to reconcile with you before you even consider letting them see your daughter. And whether or not that's even possible is entirely up to you. What you describe them as is controlling, manipulative, and selfish. Until you have determined that is no longer the case, I would keep your daughter far away from them. Update. Hey everyone, I wanted to provide an update on what transpired after my last post. Just to clarify, this is not a plea for advice or a reconsideration of my decision. I have firmly made up my mind that my parents will not meet my daughter until she is older and expresses her own desire to do so. After much contemplation, I decided to meet my parents alone first. My intention was to gauge their remorse and personal growth as human beings before making a final decision. Unfortunately, it became apparent that they hadn't truly changed. Even though I explicitly stated that the meeting would be without my child, they somehow assumed they would get to see her. They had bought gifts and had high expectations. Their disappointment was palpable when I arrived without her, and they made no effort to conceal it. During our conversation, I confronted them about their lack of accountability for their actions. Every so-called apology they offered began with the phrase, "We are sorry if you." When I confronted them about the relentless CPS calls, they justified their behavior by claiming they were doing what was best for my daughter. This infuriated me, but I tried my best to maintain composure. They dredged up every mistake I made as a young mother, asserting that I was too young and irresponsible to have a child. According to them, my daughter's well-being was merely a stroke of luck. Upon hearing those hurtful words, I calmly placed money on the table for my meal, stood up, and said, "Well, it's clear that nothing has changed. You are still the heartless individuals who cast me aside years ago, and made my life a living hell for 5 long years. You will never meet my daughter. She is happy, and she has loving grandparents." Their reaction was one of panic and desperation, claiming that I had no right to deny them access to their grandchild. In response, I simply reiterated that they were responsible for the consequences of their actions. Since that encounter, I have severed all contact with them. I discard any mail or letters they send without reading them. In due time, I will explain to my daughter what transpired between me and my parents, giving her the opportunity to meet them when she is older. However, for now, I do not want to subject myself or my daughter to their toxic behavior. I would like to address some concerns raised in the comments. Firstly, I appreciate your concern, but I am not in the United States, so grandparent rights are not applicable in my country. Secondly, I want to clarify that I am not seeking advice on whether or not to give in to my parents' request. My previous post was about my decision-making process, and I have already made a firm and resolute choice. Lastly, I want to assure everyone that my daughter is currently receiving therapy to address the trauma caused by the relentless CPS visits instigated by my parents. I am well aware of her mental and physical well-being, and I can confidently say that she is happy and healthy. Thank you all for your support and understanding. I will continue to prioritize my daughter's welfare and protect her from any further harm. Comments. As a parent myself, I can't fathom how one can disown your own child for shit like this. I mean, kids make mistakes and we as parents need to stand behind them to make sure they don't fall again. A big argument of my parents was that I had brought shame to them. My mom said, "Do you know how people are going to look at me?" The dying relative gambit is an extremely popular way to try and force contact. I had an aunt who was dying for 10 years. People kept saying I had to get in touch before the end. I didn't. He's still alive. What? Your grandchild? Y'all don't have a grandchild. I'm not your daughter. You disowned me years ago, specifically because you didn't want this grandchild. You don't have any kids to give you grandkids. Maybe you should have thought about that. You're doing that child a favor. She never need to know how awful her grandparents really were. She will grow up thinking that they just happened to die before she got to know them. By not allowing them into her life, you're doing a good job as a parent. Subscribe and hit the bell button for the best Reddit stories available.